We've called this series Meeting Our Moment. And so wherever you are, I hope you'll enjoy meeting these remarkable people and meeting our moment through them. Collaborations are common in the world of the arts, but not all of them work quite as well as the one we witnessed at our Theology and Arts Symposium at Duke in 2019 between artist Steve Prince and dancer Leah Glenn. They reminded us that extraordinary and unexpected synergies can arise when different art forms are brought together. A native of New Orleans, Steve Prince is currently based at the Muscarella Museum of Art at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, where he's Director of Engagement and Distinguished Artist in Residence. Steve is a mixed media artist and especially well known for his vibrant linoleum cut prints. Leah Glenn has for many years been an active dancer and choreographer, and also holds a position at William and Mary as Professor of Dance. Especially important to her has been her association with Jazz Art Dance Theatre, a South African group with a strong commitment to dance as an agent of social change. I spoke with each of them about their work and about their collaboration. It was obvious that they'd reflected profoundly on the interaction between art, faith, and race. It was also obvious that their work shines out as extraordinarily hopeful and humane in the midst of these often fearful and inhumane times. Leah, thank you so much. Time is precious in these difficult times, and we do at DITA, we greatly appreciate you giving up your time in this way. And Steve, I get the impression you were brought up in a vibrantly Christian home. Would it be fair, but with a mixture of both Baptist and Catholic? Is that correct?
You're spot on. I was raised, primarily Catholic, and that I went through Catholic schools from kindergarten through college. My mom was Baptist, and so I had that kind of commingling of the two, between my dad being Catholic, my mom being Baptist. And sometimes I'll go to her church, which was starkly different from the Catholic upbringing that I had. And think about New Orleans. New Orleans is this rich brew, this gumbo of music was always around me, not only in terms of the environment, from the Mardi Gras parades or the jazz bands that you would hear that pop up all over town. The radio and the records were a big household.
And Leah, what about your background?
Yes, I grew up Catholic as well. And they're living in a predominantly white community. I found that to be very, very important part of my upbringing in terms of how it grounded me. It grounded me in all of the situations that I encountered as the only one, oftentimes the only Black person in the room. And I think that you'll see that in my work as well. Maybe not as overtly or outwardly as in Steve's work, but there's this sense of groundedness is the only word I can think of, and peace. Trying to relay through my work, even though there may be conflict, I always come back to, okay, this is who I am at the core.
Right. Steve, that behind you, that magnificent. Now, I'm right that this is a linoleum cut?
I called it so, which is a phonetic play on the words. It could be S-O or S-O-W or S-E-W. And actually, woman sewing. So she's S-E-W. She's sewing together and making a patchwork quilt. The piece is actually a tribute to several women in my life. And one of them I did not meet, which was my great-grandmother, but it starts with her conceptually. And as the story goes, she was caught up in indentured servitude down in the South. And there's supposed to be this opportunity where you can pay your way to freedom. But for many African Americans, they couldn't pay it because they ended up having bills that were greater than what they were making. So they were forever caught up in it, kind of like a credit card. So in that context, my great-grandmother recognized that issue or that problem. And so she sought to escape. And so she hid two of our kids underneath our hoop dress and my great-grandmother walked to freedom. And one of those kids underneath her dress was my grandmother. It's that idea of that passing on. It's that improbable survival. It's that making a way out of no way kind of attitude that gets passed on from one generation to the next. I mean, how much stuff that was taught in the kitchen when mom was cooking food? How many stories were told at the kitchen table? You know, so all those spaces are keen, and they just continue to remind me of the richness of not only the history of the African American, but the history of our nation and all that we have gone through collectively. And then I just told stories all the way down all the way down that cloth, and the little girl's encoding all that information.
Leah, what about yourself? You used the term kinesthetic empathy.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot recently about music and community and the close association between music and dance, and the way musicians playing together have an extraordinary ability to intuit the feelings, moods, dispositions, or whatever of another person without actually saying anything, but just by the business of playing or singing together. And I think you're saying the same applies to dance, and presumably applies to let's call it the audience or a congregation, or whoever's actually viewing the dance as well. Is that right? Just talk a bit about that in general, about what happens between dancers, because it's not just a solo art, is it?
Right, right. Well, particularly dancers who have been working together for a long time, whether it's a week-long residency or over a period of years, you start to get to understand how each other moves. When I can tell, for example, when I've worked with students or dancers for a long time, what kind of day they're having by the way they walk in the room.
Yeah.
Right.
Tell us about Hush.
Hush is inspired by an incident that occurred between my son and myself. My son was diagnosed with autism as a toddler. He had a lot of the usual symptoms, including tantruming. So one evening, he was really upset, and I asked him everything under the sun I could think of that might be wrong, and I was missing the mark, and his tantrum continued to escalate. So all I could hold him. As a parent, it's extremely frustrating not to fix it.
You've done a number of collaborations by now?
A few, yes.
Yeah.
There's you saw The Youngest of Nine at DITA for that.
Leah had asked if she could use an art piece that I created called Nine Little Indians. And it's a piece that I did. It was a tribute to the Little Rock Nine. It deals with, of course, in 1954, there was a Brown versus Board of Education case where people were federally asked to integrate the schools. Right. People were slow, and they dragged their heels in different states across the United States. And it went into 1957 that in Little Rock, Arkansas, those 9 youth entered in or attempted to enter in, and then they were met with a lot of resistance.
From a choreographic standpoint, I'm focusing on the emotional terrain. I'm focusing on the emotional terrain so that by the end of the piece, I'm hoping that there's this sense of familiarity, this sense of respect, renewed respect for humanity in general, to allow for more conversations, difficult conversations to happen.
One of the things that I noted about the civil rights era and several of those stories of resistance and standing in the gap and that persistence and that consistency that they exhibited, I saw God in it. And one of the lenses I saw is through out of the book of Ephesians, where Paul writes, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and things in high places. And he encouraged his believers and the followers to put on the whole armor of God. And so that's what I believe that it was girding those youth as they entered that school, is that the whole armor of God was around them, protecting them and girding them, because it was not a battle against, against flesh and blood, but against principalities.
Absolutely.
Things that are operating in high places. And so when I see this moment in terms of where we're at, we're still grappling with those same issues. And so we have so much more work to be steadfast in that.
We're not living in the 1950s, no, but we are living in 2020, where so many of the issues that were being struggled with in the early civil rights movement are still with us, perhaps in a different form. Could you reflect on that, what's different about these two times, and how you see your own work? I mean, it's an enormous question, I know, but how you see your own work engaging with our particular cultural moment?
That's a very good question, Jeremy. I remember the day after, maybe a few days after George Floyd was killed, one of my colleagues called me and said, I don't know what to say. I just wanted to call and ask you how you're doing. And she asked me if I thought my work might reflect this moment in some way. And in that moment, it was, again, so raw. I felt the weariness that we've been talking about, right? I felt the weariness. I said this, I've been dancing this dance for years. I don't have another dance on this topic. Yeah. And the point of not giving up is it's so important. It's so important. The point, I guess you said that, so important.
Not growing weary, yeah.
But not growing weary. And then a few days later, I received just a nice note from a friend of mine, from a friend of the family who lived in Manchester, Connecticut. And she found an editorial written by my dad about his work desegregating the educational system and the police and the fire department. And he discussed the resistance that he had in doing so. And I ended up creating a piece entitled Letter to the Editor. So it's about continuing to call it out. Continue to call it out.
But you're doing it in part, at least, through dance, so that presumably, that just as with Hush, the dance did what words couldn't do at that time. It's very often in the artistic medium, in the arts, that can, as it were, carry you forward to the next thing without knowing why. But Steve, what about your reflections on all this?
I look at it through the lens of, and I've said this in talks that I've done, is that the artist is the truth sayer. That's where I see our role, and that we are the ones who are like the moral, the ethical barometer of what's going on around us. And the way you can tell about the health of a nation is through its arts.
Absolutely.
And you can see so much through it. And
as well as the sickness of the nation sometimes, yes.
Well as the sickness. Just as Leah said, I remember when this whole COVID thing hit, and then the whole racial explosion took across America, and the weariness that I was feeling. And it was a conversation I had with my brother. He and I were talking. We went to visit right before the whole COVID thing hit, and we were in New Orleans and everything, and then all the racial tensions. And he said to me in conversation, he's like, Steve, this is the work you've been doing the whole while.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, this is your time.
Yes, quite.
He said, this time people need to hear what you have to say, and they're probably going to hear it a little differently.
Yeah.
And that has bared itself to be true, because I've gotten, just as Leah has gotten messages and calls from different people, because what COVID did, it caused everyone to stop and to pause. The whole world was disrupted. It was a very similar moment. I would say the two closest moments within recent history. One would be 9/11.
No, I'm just going to say 9/11 would be the same, wouldn't it?
And the other one was when Hurricane Katrina hit. Not necessarily everybody across the whole nation felt what people in New Orleans felt in terms of the storm, but we got a little bit of deeper glimpse of what level of sickness that is still embedded within this fabric of this nation through that storm. And then this moment here, when you had those whole rash of Black people who were being, killed and slain within the streets and in their homes, you had an opportunity. Now there's been all kinds of different conversations that have been taking place all over the place. And but also I do want to state that, we've been having a lot of different conversations. Yes, I do believe that to some level it's really beautiful to see the diversity that is out there protesting. It is wonderful to see the youth out there, but I'm also very, very still and listening very carefully to what is not being said. And when I say what's not being said, I'm really curious as to what's going on at the various tables across the nation. Yeah, I'm sharing with you what's taking place at the Black table, but what's happening at the white table? What conversations are being had within the households that we're not hearing?
Absolutely.
And that's the part where I'm very still about, and I have been asking that question of my white friends very openly with them as they're asking me very open questions about how I feel. So I said, well, what's going on in the white community? What's going on in the spaces where I'm not, that I haven't been invited to, or I'm not there on the everyday with?
And is anything changing? Presumably, you must be.
That's it. That's the key question. Like, is there a challenge to these issues that are going on? Is there a challenge to the systemic issues that are here that we've been grappling with, or are we just not want to deal with it because we're afraid of what might happen? Because of what we imagine where this thing will lead us.
Just a bit of encouragement. Your feedback, Steve. When I look at your work from a very different culture, we have our own certainly race challenges here, but with a different history and a different culture. When I see that, and particularly even if in your darker pieces, there's something of this energy and warmth and humanity that doesn't leave me in despair or feeling weary or hopeless or what's the point. There's so much art and plenty of music which just, as it were, thrusts it before you in all its degradation and awfulness and leads you there. And maybe there's a place for that as well, but something else is going on there. And similarly with your dance, Leah, that just the very activity of putting together a dance that even if it's about the hardest things, is still, as you were saying earlier, Steve, beautiful, is still formed, is still redolent of some kind of hope. That's extraordinarily important. Folks, I could go on all night. Thank you both very much. I mean, for being so honest, for sharing so much of yourself, for not skating over the darker things. We are all profoundly grateful, and we're going to have you back at Duke before long, I promise.
I love it.